Members, this is the joint panel meeting of the Financial Affairs and Housing panels, and we've already formed a quorum. Before the meeting, I got the consent of Ms. Starry Lee, chairman of the other panel, so that I can chair the meeting together with Ms. Lee. We only have one subject item today, and that's the issue of further measures to address the overheated property market. Let's invite the administration team to join us. Welcome to the representative from the Transport and Housing Bureau and also the Financial Services and the Treasury Bureau. I'll defer to the two bureau directors who will first give us an opening statement, and then the floor will be open to members, and members will be given 5 minutes for their questions and answers. And after listening to the opening statements by the two bureau directors, please raise your hand, and then the secretary will jot down your names. First, over to Professor Anthony Cheung, Secretary for Transport and Housing. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. The administration would like to brief the members of the two panels on the further measures to address the overheated property market. Will be here to listen to your views and will be answering your questions as well. With regard to the details, I think they've been set out in the electrical brief issued to members last week, and so I'll be very brief in my opening statement. Well, in the Chief Executive's election manifesto, he said that housing is the top priority for many members of the community, and that's also one of the priorities of the administration. That's why he has taken it very seriously in addressing the problem and will be moving in 4 directions and would be adopting short, medium to long-term measures to address the problem. Number 1, we have to increase land supply. Number 2, we have to curb property speculative activities, and 3, enhancing the transparency of property transactions, and 4, preventing excessive expansion in mortgage lending, and also also ensuring the healthy and stable development of the property market. Despite the fact that during the first 9 months of this year, our economy has slowed down somewhat, but then with high liquidity in the market and also a lot of hot money in the market. During the past few months, property prices have gone up by some 20%, and in particular for the small to medium prices, property or flats, the prices have gone up more significantly, and therefore we believe that there is already an exuberance in the market, and also given the current situation, we believe that property prices have already gone beyond the means of most members of the public. In particular, in September this year, the U.S. introduced the 3rd round of QE, and therefore that has increased the risk in the market, and that would put more pressure on the property market. And we believe that if we allow the situation to continue, that would affect the global and local macroeconomic situation, and that would also we can also not underestimate the impact on the people's livelihood. And given the current situation, that is the tight supply in the market, and there is also this overheated or exuberance in the market. That's why on the 26th of October, that is last Friday, we announced the latest round of control measures. And basically there are 2 measures. Number 1, we increase the rate for the SSD, and also the other measure is to introduce this new measure, that is this buyer stamp duty for non-Hong Kong permanent resident buyers. First of all, I'll address the first measure, that is the additional SSD, and then the Professor Chen, the Secretary for FST, will be giving you more details on the second measure. Under the present stamp duty ordinance with regard to the SSD, or more appropriately, under the original SSD mechanism, it applies to transactions that have taken place after the 20th of November 2010, and transactions or properties that are being transacted within a 20-month period. And indeed, after the implementation of the SSD on the 20th of November 2010 until the end of September this year, we had a total of 1,140 transactions subject to SSD, involving a total of around $200 million. According to the Inland Revenue Department, after the introduction of the SSD in 2011 for confirmed sales and also for short-term transaction, when compared to 2010, there was a reduction by about 42.5%. But then there are also signs to show that the effectiveness of the SSD after a year of acquisition, the effect will come down. In particular, for resale cases taking place between 12 and 24 months, if you look at the number of such transactions in recent months, there is a steady increase up from 383 cases to up from 83 in March to 218 in September this year. And that shows that the 5% discount has been offset because of the links of the acquisition. And given the current situation, we believe that there is a need for us to review the SSD, and there is a need for us to provide a stronger disincentive for speculators and short-term investors. That's why we propose that for the tax ban of SSD, that should be increased, and also the application or the period that would be applicable would also be lengthened to 3 years. As a result of that, during the first 6 months of acquisition, the rate will be increased to 20%, and for those between 6 and 12 months, that will be 15%, and for transactions between 12 and 3 years, there will be this rate of 10%. We believe that this measure will be able to reduce the incentive for short-term investors to resell their properties. As for those buying the properties for self-ownership or self-occupation, and also for the long-term investors, there would also not be any impact. And I have to emphasize that given the current tight supply in the market, and of course the source of the problem is the short supply of flats, and therefore we will have to ensure that there will be steady supply of land in order to ease the situation in the long run. And the government's strategy in resolving the housing problem is still very much driven by supply of land. And now I'll defer to the Secretary for FST to give you more details on the second measure. Yes, just now the Secretary for Transport and Housing has already told you about the exuberance in the property market, and in order to effectively curb speculative and short-term resale activities, we have introduced the SSD, the special stamp duty, and I would also like to explain why we have to introduce such measures to control demand in the short term. First of all, the external economy is not doing well, and also Hong Kong's economy has also been dragged down by the European debt crisis. And in terms of the GDP in the second quarter this year, there is a slight decline on a quarterly basis, and also in July and August, the retail business has also come down. But then for local residential property prices during the first 3 quarters, the cumulative increase was close to 20%, and Hong Kong's property market, when compared to the performance of the local economy, the performance has run counter to that, and that is worrying. And also looking forward, that is even more worrying. That is in September, with the introduction of QE3 in the US, interest rate will be kept at an excessively low level, and as a result, there would be this expectation that that would further push up property prices, and it's expected that with such push, it could maintain or it could be kept that way for the next 2 or 3 years, and as a result, the exuberance in the market would be further fueled. And because of the lack of sense of crisis in the market, and they have not realized that the property prices have already gone beyond the means of most people, and also the economy, and therefore there is a high likelihood that prices will continue to spiral up, and therefore we will have to introduce not only the SSD, we have also launched this new buyer's stamp duty, the BSD, for the first time, and this will apply to all non-Hong Kong permanent resident buyers, including non-locals and also both local and overseas registered companies. When they buy Hong Kong's residential properties, they will have to be subject to this BSD. And other than having to pay the regular stamp duty, they will also have to pay this additional 15% BSD. And if they resell their property within a 3-year holding period, they will also be subject to the SSD. This new measure will substantially increase non-HKPR's buyers' costs, and that would also be a disincentive for them. And we have already taken the initiatives to supply more land, so that in the long run we'll be able to address the issue of short supply. But then that will take time for flats to be put up. And also, we have also targeted at this exuberance in the market. We believe that we should introduce this new round of measures as soon as possible in order to manage demand. Hong Kong has always espoused this simple taxation system, and therefore it's not easy for us to introduce any tax type. But then the two measures are targeted at the problem, and they are the most effective in addressing the current problem or the phenomenon that we are seeing. On the one hand, we are trying to combat or curb short-term speculation, and we will also be addressing the short-term supply problem in order to address this imbalance. In order to ensure that there will be healthy development in the property market, that's our long-standing policy. We'll continue to monitor the external economy's impact on the local economy, and we will also be analyzing the effectiveness of these measures, and we'll be monitoring the situation, and wherever necessary, will not hesitate to take appropriate measures to address the problem. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the introduction by the two bureau chiefs. Members who have registered to speak are Starry Lee, Chen Kin Po, Chen Kem Lam, Pun Xiu Peng, James To, Vincent Fang, KK Kwok, Albert Ho, Kenneth Leung, Leung Kwok-hing, Wang Ting Kong, Sim Chung Kai, Tony Che, Leung Sing. Well, at the beginning of the meeting, I said that there will be 5 minutes each for each member, including a reply in the first round. Ms. Starry Lee. Thank you, Chairman. We should adopt extraordinary measures in an extraordinary time. I do agree that we are experiencing an extraordinary time, and Mr. C.K. Chan has already said that the rise in the property market means that prices are beyond the affordability of the public. Many members of the public have expected the CE to do something effective in stabilizing property prices, but then people are saying that CE's 10 measures and also the so-called Hong Kong property for Hong Kong residents have not achieved the desired effect. The CE's 10 measures actually do not mean anything on the supply side, and also even if you have 20,000 units devoted every year to Hong Kong property for Hong Kong residents, compared to the entire property market and the overall supply of units, that is only peanuts. So people say that the new BSD is really what it takes to address the problem, because within a very short period, you will make a difference to the cost for non-Hong Kong local resident buyers, and so that the Hong Kong property market will again be steered by local buyers and users. So I do support that the BSD will be an effective measure in the short term for returning the Hong Kong property market to Hong Kong buyers and users. After the launch of the measure, the market has been saying that there is a lot of liquidity and there is low interest, so speculation has turned from residential property to taxi operating licenses, and taxi drivers are already complaining that the taxi license has risen to $7 million, saying that the car rental may well go up as a result. And of course, speculation is also rife with regard to car parking spaces and shop spaces. So I'd like to ask the administration, apart from BSD for residential properties, are you going to do anything to address rife speculation on car parking spaces, shop spaces, and taxi licenses? This is the first question. Number 2, the effect of this BSD. There has been reporting in the media that for mainland tycoons, Yes, this adds to the cost, but then the renminbi is appreciating, and they are actually paying property prices at 80% only if they use renminbi. And this morning I searched the media, and it is said that somebody just disregarded the BSD, and there has been a transaction already. And some property agents have done a survey to say that the new BSD will only affect 3% of mainland prospective buyers. Only 3% of the mainlanders interviewed say that they would be deterred. So the BSD is not going to have a big effect, it seems, on mainlanders. So how long will your observation period be before you come back to report to us on the impact of the BSD on the property market? Who will take the question? Chairman. On these two questions by Ms. Lee, first of all, non-residential property speculation. We are aware that there is concern in society that there is a lot of hot money flowing into Hong Kong, and whether because of the new measures to address residential property speculation, the money will flow to other investment opportunities, including non-residential properties, including car parking spaces. The FS said very clearly some time ago that the administration will be watching the situation closely, will be watching market trends if necessary. Because of macroeconomic and financial stability considerations, we will not rule out tackling the situation by other ways. Last Friday, the administration announced an enhanced SSD system and also the introduction of the BSD, and you ask us for the impact. Now we are watching the market very closely on a daily basis. Our initial assessment is that maybe members have already known from media reports that, generally speaking, the new tax will affect transactions, and people have different things to say about the prices, but the administration will be watching, and when we propose the legislation to the council here, we'll certainly have new data to do an analysis for you. Second member, Chen Kin-po. Thank you, Chairman. Certainly the market is worrying in that it is spiraling, and the administration has tackled it with these two measures. But then there is a saying that the bubble has already formed, and if you take these two measures, there will be a quick downward trend introduced into the market. But I don't think so. I believe the low interest environment will only be there until 2015, and if there is a new American president, the interest system might well be changed. So I'd like to ask you whether you have analyzed all these issues. If the property market should collapse as a result, what are your measures to tackle such a situation? And also there is analysis saying that you would only be tackling the symptoms, not the root of the problem, and the solution would be to supply more land and housing. So people are saying that these two measures are just for buying time. So I'd like to ask you about land supply. What are your plans to supply more land, including reclamation? Who will take the question? Mr. Chan mentioned 2 points. Let me tackle the last point first, and that is about land supply and whether we are just buying time with these two measures. Certainly, the extreme exuberance in the market is one of the considerations behind the announcement of the two measures last week. The two demand suppression measures have been considered from different angles, not just the property market per se. Now, of course, in terms of housing supply, there is a tight supply situation. And the administration has always said that we believe the basic fundamental solution must be by land supply and housing supply. The administration has taken short and medium-term measures in order to hope to increase supply in the short term. In fact, in the next 3-4 years, we believe there will be 65,000 new units completed, and the occupation permits that we have issued have been more than that we issued in the last period. So let us observe the situation for a while to see whether these measures go any way to address the imbalance situation. As to whether the market will collapse and also the interest rate issue, may I defer to Mr. Chan to give you the reply. I think Mr. Chen Kim-po asked a very valid question. We have been observing the development of the property market, and we were worried that there could be the forming of a property bubble. Mr. Chan will remember that the FS and other officials in the financial stream have always issued warnings to the public as to whether the administration should take more measures to address the property market situation. Well, apart from looking at GDP and whether the property market is beyond the affordability of the market, we have also looked at external factors. Because of the euro debt problem, for a period in the past, the market has shown that it was wary about the risks involved. But then after June, euro debt seemed to have eased, and then there was QE3, and we saw that the market was becoming exuberant again. Therefore, this is a matter of crisis management, and that is whether we have to do something, that whether we have to take measures in order to manage demand. And if we do, what are the effects to be expected? If not, what are the risks that will be involved? So we were trying to balance a lot of factors before we decided to issue these two demand management measures. Now, of course, the market is always changing. No one can foresee what is going to happen in the market. Now we have announced the two measures. At the same time, we hope that when we come up with the legislation to entrench these two measures, we hope there will be a mechanism for the FS, which is going to be a simpler way, so that after agreement with LegCo, we can go for a simpler way to adjust the interest rates or the levy rates. I think that would be a kind of a more ideal arrangement so that we can deal with future problems in a flexible manner. Mr. Chen Kam-lam, the SSD was launched in November 2010, and over these 2 years, property prices continued to rise. So you can see that the SSD was not there to suppress prices, but rather to maintain a healthy development of the property market and also to prevent excessive lending by banks, and also to contain the desire to purchase property. However, we have seen the property market boosting and prices have never stopped to go up. And in fact, prices have risen by a wide margin in the past 2 years. Now, the administration is still thinking of making use of more or less the same measure to balance supply and demand. I don't think that is the best way to do it. My question is, actually, in the mid-90s, there was also a short supply of land and housing, and at that time, at PRH estates and low-density development areas, we were able to squeeze land to turn them into infill sites, where housing units could be built. And that went a long way to address the problem then. And also now we still have land reserved for schools premises. But as you know, Chairman, we are talking about under-enrollment in secondary schools and even in primary schools. And in the time to come, we expect more schools to be closed. However, we still reserve land for the building of school premises. Shouldn't we free up that kind of land for the building of PRH? And also we were talking about Northeast NT development. And the STH and the S for development, of course, are managing two bureaus. And when we talk about land supply, it seems the interface is somewhat lacking between the two bureaus. I'd like to ask the Secretary here, would you consider allotting sites at NENT for public housing before you launch the whole comprehensive plan for NENT? Because property prices are rising in such a way that there is pressure brought to bear on the entire economy. Secretary, actually 2 years ago, when we launched the first SSD, actually it has been found to be effective. It had a dampening effect on short-term speculation. But as I said at the outset, recently we have seen that in this year, the market has become much more heated, and of course there are external factors, including QE3 launched by the US. So the effect of the original SSD has been eroded as a deterrent for people who would be reselling the units between 12 to 24 months. But then for long-term investors and for users, we still like to satisfy the demand. As for supply, Mr. Chan was talking about making rational use of land resources. Well, actually, we are walking down that direction by way of medium-term and long-term measures. At the end of August, the CE announced 10 measures, and that was the aim he was trying to achieve. That is why when we are developing new land resources, we like at the same time to free up GIC sites or even flatted factory buildings, so we can have more land resources. Number 3, NENT. I understand that the relevant plan is now receiving a lot of comments, including comments from members. And I believe there was a motion debate also at the council here.
With regard to public housing, we have heard a lot of views from the community, and we strive to increase the ratio between public rental housing and private housing. Yes, Mr. Poon? Using the SSD as a measure to suppress the overheated market, I basically agree, and I think I've already made a point earlier on during the CE's question and answer session. I truly believe that Hong Kong's property market is seriously overheated, and as a result, people's livelihood has been affected. Well, the other day I asked about the mass market situation and also the medium price properties, because I understand that the SSD and BSD will apply across the board, whatever size of the flat may be, but then there might be multinationals or multinational companies coming to Hong Kong to buy property for their senior management or senior staff. So I'd like to know if the administration has conducted any assessment on the impact of these measures. For overseas companies coming to Hong Kong to invest, would that serve as a disincentive for them? So have you done any assessment in that regard? Professor K.C. Chan. Yes, I'll try to answer the question. Yes, you're talking about investment incentive. If it's an incentive to buy in the property market, and during the past few years, because of the soaring of property prices in Hong Kong, given the substantial increase in prices, that it's in itself is already a negative factor. Many overseas companies have been saying that Hong Kong's prices are too high, while office accommodation is very expensive and residential properties are also expensive, and for their staff to rent or buy any property in Hong Kong, that would be very expensive. So whether it's due to external environment or exuberance in the market or speculative activities, whatever, all these have already rendered our property market not attractive. That's not conducive to our business environment. And of course, the administration is not able to change everything. In particular, external environment is decided by others, not us. But then on this occasion, we've introduced the BSD, the Buyer's Stamp Duty. Yes, indeed, we admit that some companies might find it inconvenient. Well, they might have a plan to invest, or for whatever reason they might want to buy in the local property market, and as a result they might be inconvenienced and the cost might have gone up. But then if you look at the figures, well, in the as far as residential properties are concerned, for overseas companies buying properties as a long-term measure for their senior staff, I don't think the number is very high. And therefore, from this perspective, I don't think it would deal a blow to these companies at all. But then, of course, for overseas companies, if they want to invest in the local luxury or luxury apartment market, then of course with the introduction of the BSD, that will increase their cost and there will be some impact. But then overall speaking, I believe that this measure is an extraordinary measure during an extraordinary period. Our attempt is to stabilize the property market. That might have that might cause some inconvenience to some overseas companies. But then, with regard to the state of the local economy and also the long-term development, I don't think the impact will be negative. Mr. James Doe. Next, Mr. Vincent Fang. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I understand that we will have to apply heavy medicine when the illness is serious. But then that will apply to residential property. But then for our shop premises, they are also very costly. As far as we are concerned, it's already very extraordinary. Is abnormal. So I wonder if the administration will also have a plan to do the same to shop premises. So when would you be administering or prescribing heavy medicine to shop premises? Because well, the retail sector and also the catering industry have been seriously affected, and these industries also hire many employees, and if they have to fold up or if they have to close down, then the impact will be very serious. So with regard to shop premises, when would you think that you would also have to administer or prescribe this heavy medicine to the situation? And you say that for the holding period between 12 and 24%, the percentage of the SSD will be 10%. So from 12 to 36 months, you're going to introduce or impose this 10% BSD. I'd like to clarify this with you. And finally, it's my own suggestion, because as we can see, the biggest problem is the shortage of land supply, or short supply of land. And I've already said it on many occasions at the housing panel, because well, the administration is doing this on one hand, and the administration is saying that within 3 to 4 years you'll be able to come up with some 65,000 flats, but then still is a small number. So why don't you make use of market forces? For example, for commercial buildings, you've said that well, you'll be improving commercial buildings so that you allow them to convert the use, but then you will also be imposing certain conditions, and they will have to come up with smaller units, and the prices will also have to be more reasonable, so that for the first-time home buyers, they would be able to afford it. All right, if you're willing to convert some industrial buildings or commercial buildings and allow them to convert the use, then I'm sure there'll be a lot of supply. And you can also say that within 3 years you will have to complete the conversion. That will also help address the most immediate problem. That is, in the next 2 or 3 years there'll be a short supply, and if we just rely solely on the administration, that might not be adequate. But then the administration has been saying that once this is allowed, then there might be an oversupply, and the market might fail as a result of that. But then the power to allow these buildings to be converted will still be in the hands of the administration. And if you think that there is an oversupply, you can always tighten it. And if you think that there is a demand, then you can relax it a bit. So I think all these powers are still in the hands of the administration. Will you be prepared to consider those? Who is to answer this question? Professor Chen. Yes, I'll supplement a couple of points. Well, for short premises, for speculation on short premises, you've also talked about taxi licenses and also car plates. Yes, we are very concerned about this, and the reason why we are very concerned about this, that's because of the excessively low interest rate, and therefore there is this high incentive to invest in everything that you can get your hands on, and that would also affect prices. And the two measures that we have just introduced, we believe that it's not appropriate for the time being for us to apply them to short premises in order to curb speculative activities, because the measures themselves would be more effective if they were applied to the residential property market, and the negative impact would be less significant. But then it doesn't mean that we are not concerned about the other situations. But then as to when we're going to do what at a particular timing, well, these are tax measures, and we will not be telling you anything about it, but then we have been monitoring the situation closely, and we'll be looking at the effectiveness of the proposed measures. We'll be looking at the situation in the market and also the economic situation before we take follow-up action. With regard to the conversion of industrial and commercial buildings, as far as I understand it, the Development Bureau has put in place some flexible measures to allow developers to convert some of these buildings or to redevelop these buildings. Maybe the Bureau Director can supplement. Yes, Professor Chen. Yes, indeed, concerning the conversion of industrial buildings, we'll be prepared to be more flexible so that we can release more land for those purposes. But then in terms of the actual enforcement or implementation, it depends on the location of the industrial building or the commercial building, and whether it's feasible to do so. Sorry, we have many members in the queue, and therefore I'll have to enforce the 5-minute rule very strictly. So please stick to the 5 minutes that are assigned to you. Dr. Kwok-hing. Yes, I agree with what the Bureau Director said, that is we will have to prescribe heavy medicine when it's about a very serious illness. But then after hearing what you said, well, I don't think it's going to be effective at all. And I think there is already this analyst who said that it's not going to help suppress property prices. All right, for how many weeks will these two measures be effective? Well, this morning I read the news and said that there were 2 mainland buyers, and they actually spent more than $10 million to buy up flats in San Po Kong. All right, we have many people living in these smaller flats in San Po Kong, and the price is about $10,000 plus dollars per square feet. And you said that there will be an increase in supply by about $65,000 in by 65,000 units in 3 to 4 years' time. And I think for the supply in 2007 and 06, in 2007, the supply was very small. We only had about 9,000 flats, and then by last year, it went up to about 9,450, and the biggest number was in 2010. There was slightly over 10,000 or 13,000, and then in 2009, we had 7,160. So because of the lagging behind in supply, so for the 65,000 that are going to be put up in the next 3 or 4 years, is still far from being able to address the problem. We have 50,000 people getting married in the next few years, and they have formal housing need. They are the younger couples, and they will need to buy their own flats. So for some local buyers, they say that, well, nothing can be done about it. However high you're going to increase the tax, they will still have to buy up properties because they have no confidence in the administration. They have no trust whatsoever. Or they might think that, well, this measure might be effective for a couple of months. But then if you do not change this policy of housing supply, then whoever is in a no, then they will know that, well, every year we have 50,000 people getting married. Well, let's not talk about what happened in the past. All right, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, we're talking about some 200,000 young people getting married, and their need is very modest. Whatever they can get, public rental housing or whatever, so long as they can have a roof over their head or above their head, they'll be happy. So even if the environment is very poor, well, they will still take it. Yes, you try to suppress the mainland buyers. Yes, I agree. And for the 20% introduced is okay because it's not going to affect local people with a genuine housing need. But then you've been saying that supply will have to be increased. And you've been saying this time and again, but then you gave us a figure of 65,000, and many members have said that there are different measures. But then I do not agree that we should convert all the industrial buildings, because there are SMEs operating in these industrial buildings, and they are having a very hard time, and they are being evicted by the big bosses, and they will have to go elsewhere. So SMEs are having a hard time too. So Secretary, can you give us a time frame? Well, for the short term. All right, I'm not talking about long-term housing supply. So what measures can you take to address the current problem? That is, for those in genuine housing need, how can their needs be addressed? All right, we have two bureau directors here, and yesterday the CE said that he did not ask Franklin Lam. So in making the decision, did you two talk to Mr. Franklin Lam? Who is to answer the question? Professor Chiang, the last question is very clear. I've never talked to Franklin Lam about this. No, not even chatting. Mr. Lam, it's not your turn yet. Well, in the past, with regard to the lagging behind in housing supply, that is a fact that has already happened, and what we can do is to catch up in order to catch up with the supply. And as I said, in the next 3 or 4 years, we're going to have 65,000 units coming up. That would be a lot better than what happened in the past, but then we will have to work even harder. And that's why we have just kickstarted the program on long-term housing development, and will work harder. But then, if you look at the latest reports, I think there are different viewpoints in the real estate sector or estate agency sector. They've been saying that some of the flats have been sold at high prices, and some said that transactions have been dampened. So we'll be monitoring it closely as to the development. All right, what about the 200,000 young people getting married in the next 3 or 4 years, and they're waiting earnestly as to what is to be done by you? So how are you going to ensure that they'll have a roof over above their head? Yes, Albert Ho. Chairman, I agree with what Dr. Kwok just said. Well, your measure is just a temporary measure to restrict demand. So you're trying to suppress demand. But then the supply-demand situation will still be very tight in the foreseeable future. And young people do have this genuine need in buying their own homes. You will have to address this problem. You will have to come up with effective measures to increase supply, and that's a very important point. I don't think I need to repeat that.
Talking about these two measures, first the SSD, may I refer to Annex D? There is a high figure of conform more transactions, which is much higher than the number without conform mores. And you have said that this figure includes people who pay the SSD and those who did not pay SSD. Can you not separate those figures for me, please? How many did not pay the SSD? Who can take the question? We can certainly look at the figures again to see whether we can provide you with further breakdown. But as to the issue on supply, I believe we have similar views. Even from the perspective of the administration, we understand and we admit that there is insufficient supply. So we'll work hard on that, and we hope that later on, when we propose new measures to increase supply, we will receive your support. Mr. Chan? I will supply the figures later. Well, that is an important point, because if you can see that if it is a resale by conform more, that means it is speculation, short-term speculation, and the figures are still very high. I don't know why some people are reselling without conform mores. Now, your measure is to tackle speculation. So if your measure is not effective in tackling speculation, then you have to think of ways and means to increase the stamp duty so that you stamp the resale by conform mores. Since supply is so tight, since the market is so exuberant, we should do more to target resale by conform mores, especially those within 24 months. I'll do that. Mr. Pescott.
The figures in Annex C. Anything bought before November 2010 wasn't subject to special stamp duty. So the figures for 2009, for example, and the first part of 2010, which are included in the 2010, show figures that were not subject to SSD. The 2011-2012 figures show the effect because the number of conformer sales has dropped dramatically from over 3,000 down to 69 for the first for that 24-month period that is covered by special stamp duty. So those are the basic figures. Of course, the stamp duty doesn't apply beyond 24 months. So again, you have to look at the next set of figures, the conformer sales beyond 24 months, and those figures are very stable. And that's the reason why we believe it's appropriate to extend the period of the SSD. So we're tackling the two issues directly.
But we don't have the figures here, right?
Those figures are in Annex C.
Can you not give us more comparison? And that is how the decrease can be seen. Can we have more information, please? Yes, I see that at Annex C, Mr. Chan. I have another question. I hope you will explain more clearly to the public. If some people ask a Hong Kong PR to buy on behalf of a non-Hong Kong PR, now, of course, you are cheated on the surface, but what is the criminality and also any civil liability if that is the case? Mr. Chu, IRD. Thank you. We have to clarify something. Is it that the Hong Kong PR is really buying on behalf of the Hong Kong non-Hong Kong PR? If it is a genuine transaction, it's all right. But if it is only a ploy to avoid tax, then there will be criminal liability. And the offense will attract an imprisonment term of 7 years because it is the use of a forged document. What about civil liability? Who will get the property? I'll allow you to answer that question. Is it that the non-Hong Kong resident might not be able to get back the property? That is possible. Mr. Kenneth Leung. Thank you, Chair. If an overseas holding company, and that is after the 26th of October 2012, you have, of course, to pay the BSD. But what about the new SSD? Would there be also complementary anti-tax avoidance arrangement in that when you transfer shares, you also have to pay the SSD? If yes, then when you revise the SSD legislation, would that revision affect other overseas holding companies who have been holding Hong Kong properties before the 26th of October 2012? Second question, I do support these two measures, but whether they are effective, we'll have to wait a few months to see. We'll have to look at the number of transactions and the price levels. But then there is something I'm very unhappy about. I have declared interest that I am on the board of the EAA, but I have already resigned. With regard to anti-money laundering activities, the estate's authority has issued 4 notices, and the basic requirement is that estate agents must photocopy the identity document and also bank statement of the relevant parties. However, with regard to the source of the funds, there is no procedure to confirm that. If you look at Hong Kong and overseas countries and regions who are also members of the Financial Task Force, now if you buy property in the UK and if you have tens of millions of pounds and that you cannot disclose or reveal the source of the funds, then whether it be the estate agent or the lawyers for both parties, they cannot undertake the transaction. Why is it that in Hong Kong, when we talk about property transactions as a means to launder money, why is it that we are so lenient with regard to law enforcement? First question by the IRD and second question by Mr. Pescott. IRD first, Mr. Chu. Thank you, Chairman. When an overseas company buys a property, it is just like any other person who has to give the ad valorem stamp duty and also the BSD because it is a company, so it will have to pay the BSD. But when shares are transferred, it is not property transfer, so you do not have to pay the stamp duty. And since it's an overseas company, you do not have to pay stamp duty for transfer of Hong Kong shares. Second question, Mr. Pescott. Sorry, can I ask a follow-up? Why don't you plug the loophole? If it is a transaction by overseas company, then you can obviously see that it is an a tax avoidance measure. Why do you allow people to hide the real buyer's identity? I don't know why all these years you have not plugged the loophole. Mr. Chu? Chairman, at the moment, there is no plan to extend the measure to property transactions by limited companies. But if you look at the property market, when limited companies buy property, we don't see a big number of that. Mostly it is less than 10%. And even if companies buy residential properties, that may not be for speculation. It may be for hostels for their staff. So there is no plan to do it now. Mr. Leung Kwok-hing, is not your turn yet. You are the next one. Please wait. Now, can I ask Mr. Pescott to answer the second question?
Very briefly, this issue that you raised about the practice instructions issued by the Estate Agents Authority, of course that applies to the special stamp duty. We'll be working with the Estate Agents Authority to come up with the relevant practice notes and advice in terms of the introduction of the new buyer's stamp duty. And in that context, of course, we'll try to work with them to deal with some of the issues, because the issues are different between stamp duty and buyer's stamp duty. Because, of course, under the buyer's stamp duty, all companies are caught by the new duty provisions. But stamp duty.
Sorry.
It's about, the anti-money laundering, regime. Because my feeling is that it is very lax in Hong Kong compared with other jurisdictions who are also members of the Financial Action Task Force. That is my question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Any response? I think we get the point of this member. Next one, Mr. Leung Kwok-hing. Chairman, 10% is a big number. If 10% of the people can avoid paying tax, well, I must say something about this. I don't watch TV because people say watching TV makes people silly, but I also see these meetings here and I think they also make people silly. Let me ask you a simple question. Last time when you introduced the SSD, there were financial commentators and also economists who said that it's okay, you can sell a company to other people, you don't sell the property. And you did not plug the loophole, and now you say 10% is still a small number. Secondly, imported inflation, right? QE3 has lowered people's EQ. Mr. Chan, should we unpack our currency from the US dollar? You can calculate the renminbi appreciation. Now we suffer as a result of the currency peg. And also, mainland people are subject to a different tax system. That is why they flood into Hong Kong to buy property. On the mainland, people actually also practice quantitative easing. The mainland government does not pay heed to currency management. It's just that you dare not face up to the mainland problem. We have a renminbi market, and it encourages people to speculate. You can speculate on anything at all. You can speculate on taxi licenses. You can even speculate on your positions as bureau chiefs. You can also speculate on a position in the Executive Council. That is what Mr. Franklin Lam is saying. It doesn't matter if you call them overseas buyers. And Mr. Franklin said, I did not attend the meeting, so I do not know. And Lam Wun Kwong said we would not let him know. What about a casual chat during tea? Mr. David Lee did something because he overheard people at the next table. And in the end, of course, he lost $6 million in penalty. You people may be having a chat at Hong Kong Jockey Club, I could see you on TV. It's not that I was there. So people may say, oh, I'm not optimistic, and people know what it means. This is inbred breeding, and sorry, it's all right. He can have the whole say in using his 5 minutes. And secondly, local speculators. How can you tackle this issue? Just like Mr. Franklin Lam. There is one Franklin Lam. There can be another Franklin Lam. And a third Franklin Lam. What are you going to do? Those people thrive on speculation. You know that? And he says you have to protect the financial system. But in Hong Kong, you don't only have property hegemony, you have financial hegemony. The banks are giving out loans indiscriminately, and you seek to protect them. You announce the Michael Soon's 10 measures, but nothing has been found to be effective. Now you say you have to prescribe heavy medication for this situation, but what about that? During the colonial era, there was the making available of land to the tune of only 50 hectares a year, and there was a 0 interest rate. And you were not effective. And now with the Michael Soon's 10 measures, there was a holding of supply, and that is why we do not have enough supply of land. So answer me, are you going to depeg our currency from the US dollar? And when can you allow young couples who are going to get married to buy property? Why don't you go for the form of building society? Liverpool did it, the entire of Liverpool, and even Northern England as a whole did it, so people can buy uncompleted property from the government. Are you going to do it? Only 30 seconds. Who will take the question?
Oh, yeah.
I'll need more than 30 seconds. Okay, the first answer, no depegging. And also in the course of this exchange, I couldn't get all the figures, so I'll defer to Ms. Chen to answer the question. Ms. Mabel Chen, with regard to the transactions involving residential properties, well, for company cases, that would only account for 10% of the total number of transactions, and most of them are local companies, and therefore for overseas companies, they are only accounting for some 1% of the total number of transactions in the local markets, in particular residential market. All right, are they avoiding tax? Are they evading tax? Mr. Leung, your time's up. Next, Mr. Wong Teng Kwong. Thank you, Chairman. I support the introduction of the new measures by the administration. I also understand that the measures are to suppress speculative activities. It's not there to dampen investment and also people's buying or purchase of properties. And we also have to implement the policy for Hong Kong land for Hong Kong people, or Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people. I understand that you have worked on those two aspects, but then is there room for improvement? Number one, for companies selling their shares, and also the stamp duty for such transfer or transaction. But I wonder if you can introduce this period during which, if there is any sale of property during this period, let's say 3, 5, or 7 years, and if they have another transaction to sell the shares, then will they be exempted from the special stamp duty? Is that that's number one? And number two, with regard to Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people, we are talking about non-Hong Kong permanent residents, and they'll be covered by this policy. So for Hong Kong people, what's the definition? Are you just referring to Hong Kong permanent residents, or for anybody with a Hong Kong ID card? Can that be considered? Because under these circumstances, can it be like companies buying up properties, and after a period of time, if they sell their properties afterwards, then you can exempt them from the duty. Is that possible? Yes, Mr. Professor Chiang. With regard to Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people, well, the definition will be based on the HKPR identity. As for stamp duty, if for those who can be exempted from the BSD, well, that would also be confined to Hong Kong permanent residents. With regard to the transfer of shares, with the enhanced SSD, the holding period will be for 3 years. In other words, within a 3-year period, you'll be subject to the SSD, but then after 3 years, you will no longer be subject to that. In other words, for long-term investment, they will not be affected. In other words, if you are not going to sell your property within the next 3 years, then you will not be subject to this SSD. Yes, Chairman. Well, for Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people, we do have some immigration policy for the talent admission scheme. So for these newcomers or new arrivals, they might be executives from overseas companies, and as soon as they come, they are eligible to applying for the Hong Kong ID card, but then they are not permanent residency. They are not permanent residents. But then will they be defined as Hong Kong residents as well after you have issued them with an ID card? And secondly, all right, if they are being targeted because you're concerned that they might also become speculators, all right, they might hold properties, but then after a certain period of time, if they want to sell the properties, will this BSD apply? Can they be exempted, including company shares, if they just transfer the shares of the company, and as a result there might be a change of hands of the property or in the property, then will they be eligible for this exemption so that they will be able to, so will there be a refund of the BSD? Professor Chen? Well, if I understand Mr. Wong correctly, so you mean we are only targeting speculators and therefore for the SSD? Yes, indeed, that's the objective, that's the purpose. But then for the BSD, actually the policy objective is to suppress demand or manage demand. So it's not just about speculation. That is, we give priority to Hong Kong permanent residents so that their housing needs can be met first. For non-permanent residents of Hong Kong, whatever they are buying their properties for, we will have to increase the cost for them. As regards whether there can be other definition instead of the Hong Kong permanent resident definition, well, I'm concerned that if we depart from that statutory definition, then it will be very difficult to come up with a very clear definition. Yes? Mr. Sin Chung Kai, I'd like to ask more about the definition of companies, because just now the company registry told us that it only accounted for some 10% of the total number of transactions. But then for local companies, well, forgive me if I'm not familiar with that. How do we define local companies? For overseas funds setting up companies in Hong Kong, and they might be registered locally, but then the funding might have come from overseas. So they might be registered locally, but then the capital might have come from overseas. So would that still be defined as a local company? And how do you distinguish between a local company with overseas investment or capital? And also on this occasion, maybe it's more appropriate to put it to the Housing Bureau. All right, we have developers who have made it clear that it will be effective, but only for 3 months. So what's your response to such a remark? And also, apparently there are some companies saying that for the 10+%, I'll take it up and I'll swallow it on your behalf. So what's your response, Bureau Director? Ms. Mabel Chen, on the figures, I'd like to say this to Mr. Sin. I'd like to confirm that the figure that you refer to, that is, we are referring to residential properties, the number of transactions. In 2011, well, if you look at the overall transactions, well, for company cases, they have only accounted for some 10%, and the definition of company includes both local and overseas companies. But then for overseas companies, in other words, for overseas registered companies, they only account for 1% of the total number of transactions. In other words, out of the 10% that we are talking about 10% would be, about 90% would be locally registered. And for these locally registered companies, we do not rule the possibility that some of the directors might be overseas or expatriates, but then they are registered locally. In other words, the argument that overseas capital speculating in the local property market through local companies, well, that cannot be ruled out, because quite a number of these companies, I do not have the figures, I don't know if you have, but then some of the overseas capital might have set up companies here. All they need to do is to do a registration, a business registration. It will just cost them several $1,000s, and then as soon as the setup is defined as a local company, but then you said that not many companies have been involved in such speculative activities. So, but then there is no proof, right? Well, we've also talked to the CR and also the land registry. We have analyzed the figures with them too. For the 90% that I just referred to, they are local companies, and then some 90% of them have Hong Kong permanent residents holding the shares or being directors. The second part of the question, yes? Professor Cheung, with regard to the effectiveness of these two measures, I've noticed that there are different remarks in the community. Some said that they are very concerned that that would deal a very heavy blow to the property market, but others say that that would depend on other factors, including external factors. Therefore, as far as the administration is concerned, we have indeed taken on board different factors in coming up with these two measures, and we'll be monitoring the situation closely. And Mrs. Sin's other question is that some developers have already said that they will continue to sell their properties, but then there would be some discount or some rebate and so on. But then for developers, if it's their marketing strategy, of course they are free to come up with different initiatives or strategy. But then as far as we are concerned, we hope that in terms of the pricing policy, that would be highly transparent. In particular, starting from the middle of next year, with regard to the first-hand residential property ordinance that will come into effect in the middle of next year, and after from then onwards, all the prices will have to be made very transparent, and all the pricing lists will have to be disclosed. And assuming that different people are treated differently under the price list, then they will have to explain and justify that, and therefore the developers will have to explain to us that if different people would be able to buy properties at different prices, they will have to understand, they will have to consider the implications and the impact. Mr. Sin, so what if they indeed offer some discounts to certain groups of people? Because at the end of the day, it all boils down to the cost. So if they offer a rebate on 15% to be charged, then would there be measures by the administration to target such acts? Well, as far as the administration is concerned, for the imposition of the SSD, that depends on the transaction price and also the market price, and that's been established practice and is effective. As regards the marketing strategy of the developer, legally speaking, we don't have any restriction or provision on that. Mr. Chair, with the exuberance in the market, it has already gone beyond the means or affordability of the general public, and therefore we will have to do something about it, and increasing supply is important, and of course that would require more land. I understand that the administration has been doing or working on it, and there have been different views in the community about this. But then if we are not able to change land use in a timely manner, then whatever you say might just become empty talk. Therefore, I hope that you can do a bit more in this respect, or else without land, we will simply not be able to increase housing supply. Alright, in terms of increase in supply, if very little can be done within the near term, if you are not able to achieve any visible impact, then for short-term measures to control the supply or control the demand, then I would be prepared to support it. But then some are suggesting that you're actually prescribing heavy medicine or medication to cure a serious illness. And some are also saying that, that might not be effective if you look at the experience in Singapore. I understand that you said that you'll be monitoring the situation closely, but then I would also hope that you would give priority to Hong Kong permanent residents in order to meet their housing need, because they have this advantage when they buy flats, because they do not have to be subject to the BSD. But then I'd like to know, in your review or in rolling out this policy, has the administration considered whether these two measures will achieve the objective of suppressing property prices? To what extent will that be achieved? Or are you going to continue to review it, or are you going to roll out further measures? And my question is, and of course this measure is targeting at the residential property market, and is also targeted at the non-Hong Kong permanent residents. But then because of Hong Kong's economic situation, there might be overseas investors coming to Hong Kong to invest. Will you be concerned that there might be a trend that we are actually trying to discriminate against non-Hong Kong permanent residents? You will have to allay their concerns, because we are very much an external-oriented economy. If they think that they are being targeted, then that's not good. So have you thought about this? Yes, when we came up with this policy, we did some assessment. And of course, our policy objective, number one, is to ensure that Hong Kong permanent residents will enjoy priority in buying flats. And we can see that we have basically achieved this objective. And we also would like to see a market development which is more healthy and stable. And how are we going to do this or achieve this? Well, we will have to look at a basket of factors. And property prices is, of course, one of the factors. But then there are other factors, for example, our economic environment, our affordability, and also the supply and demand situation, whether there has been an imbalance. We'll have to look at a basket of factors in assessing or evaluating the effectiveness or otherwise of our policy, or whether we need to take further follow-up action. So we'll be looking at those. As to whether or not that will affect the perspective or the perception of overseas investors, well, we do not have any control on our capital movement. Well, many investors are free to engage in whatever activities or investments that they like to engage in, but then we can see that there is an overheated market, there is an exuberance in the market, and that has affected Hong Kong's property prices. And of course, property prices would be susceptible to investment sentiments. That's true. But then if that has already gone beyond the sustainability of Hong Kong in terms of risk management, then we will have to take measures to address this. And I do not think that that would affect Hong Kong's free market image and operation. We still welcome overseas capital to come into Hong Kong to invest in this financial center and do their business.
吳亮星議員。
吳亮星。
多謝主席。就剛才好多同事講到。
Just now, people say that this is an extraordinary time. Indeed, this has aroused the concern of members of the public, but I think there is some difficulty here. Now, you are trying to freeze the demand, but is that something good? If there is not more supply, then when you freeze the demand, you are just lengthening this extraordinary period. And what kind of results do you expect to see? Have you done any risk assessment? Because if you freeze the demand, there will be an explosion of a bigger scale later. In the short term, there will be some effect on the credit market. As to whether there is really rife speculation, why, I don't think it is speculation that is boosting demand. I think there is real demand. Mainlanders only take up 20% of the market, but have you done any statistics to see whether mainlanders really speculate in the market after buying the property? Because they might keep the property since there is the individual travel scheme or scheme, they may want to come back very often, and they might very well set up a home here. And Hong Kong people also buy property in Zhongshan, in other provinces in China. So are they also speculating on property in China? No. Do you have statistics to support such a measure, saying that there is rife speculation in the market? And how can you keep this so-called extraordinary period to the shortest? And secondly, housing and land, you need reserves for both. I'd like to ask about the LTHS. Now, you need to have a land bank. What about housing? I think in 2003, 2004, we had the case of Hong Kong Peninsula. It was an overhang. At the time, I was at the Housing Authority, and I said that as in the stock market, if a lot of that is in the hands of the administration, then you turn it into the tracker fund so that you can release back to the market in an orderly manner. Now, at the time, the HOS development was given back to the developer. And I'd like to ask you, if later on, if there will be more supply, you should keep it in a housing bank or reserve. And when there is the need, you can release back into the market to adjust the market. Is that part of your consideration in the LTHS? And also, to tackle immediate housing needs, are you also looking at rental inflation? Have you looked at the existing vacancy rate so that you can steer it with certain property, and so that vacant premises would be made use of because of your policies, so that at least you can tackle short-term supply issues? 3 questions. You only have a minute or so. Who will be answering those? On the issue of supply, with regard to the demand from investors, long-term investors and users, I think we are not targeting them. Even with the new SSD, we are only targeting resale within 3 years. As for the BSD, of course, we are trying to allow Hong Kong PR to have priority in buying residential property. As for long-term housing and also land banks, we have already started a review on the LTHS, and we are going to look at the medium-term and long-term requirements in Hong Kong so we can have better planning for land supply. Perhaps we are not going to see in the short term that there will be an oversupply of housing, but Mr. Ng was saying how we can make sure that there will be steady supply. That is also something we want to look at as well. Mr. Chan, anything from you? And Mr. Ng Lansing, any follow-up? I'd like you to come to grips with timing better, because now you are freezing demand. You have to tackle that only at a later stage. You know, it is still there. You're just freezing it, and you have to remain sensitive to the relevant risks involved. Okay, time is up for you. Now, Mr. Chen Wai-fong. Thank you, Chairman. The measures also include the buying of residential property in the name of companies. Actually, many residents in Hong Kong also hold residential property in the name of companies. Most of these properties are also owner-occupied. The new measure will have an impact on these residents. Say, for example, when they need cash flow, they would want to sell their property, sometimes at a loss, for that matter. But then these people are not speculating. Then they also have to pay the SSD. I think you are inconveniencing the public, and there will be an impact on these people. So could I ask you, if a company with all its directors who are all Hong Kong PR, can you exempt them? Who can take the question? Bureau Director. In the past week or so, I have heard about this question. When we designed the measure, there was an internal discussion on the same matter, but I must apologize and say no. because if we exempt companies with all directors being Hong Kong PR, it will create a big loophole. And there will be huge difficulties plugging it. And we have to make clear policies. We therefore cannot exempt companies with all directors being Hong Kong PRs. This may inconvenience some Hong Kong residents, but I just say I hope they can buy property using other forms. What about the need for urgent cash? Because they are not speculating. Let me respond to that point. Actually, 2 years ago when we introduced the original SSD, in fact, the relevant bills committee here also held quite a comprehensive debate on that. We understand that this might have an impact on people who have to resell their property because of genuine need, and that these people are not speculating. But where do we draw the line? It's not easy to draw that line. And that is why at the Bills Committee, the administration's view remained that whether it be individuals or companies, under the SSD, all resale would have to be subject to the control. But what if people have a heavy illness, they have to pay doctor's fees, and they need to sell property to get the cash, but then they are still subject to the SSD? I think that is quite unreasonable. Chairman. Well, there may be circumstances under which individuals might feel that they are unfairly treated because of the situation they are in. But in terms of the implementation of the SSD, if we do not set any objective criteria, it will not be easy to enforce it. But what if people can supply you with a doctor's certificate? Can you consider exempting them? Well, perhaps we can discuss this at the Bills Committee again later. Mr. Cheung, any follow-up? I think the Secretary should not subject residents' interests to the enforcement issues. I think you are filling the policy gap, making use of this inconvenience caused to the public. Mr. K.K. Fong, may I refer to Paris 4 and 5 of the paper? We are told that property prices have risen by 109% over 2008, and it is 79% higher than those in 2008, and also the affordability ratio has risen from 31.7% to 50%. Well, I hope legislators and bureau chiefs should not continue to cheat ourselves and also cheat the public through the broadcasting of this meeting. In fact, you have done many things, and yet prices have gone up. And this is not caused by mainlanders who come here, because they only account for 10% or so. So what is affecting us? The figures tell us that they have skyrocketed. I don't think it is all due to buying by mainlanders. Just look at the property developers who are only producing or putting up flats for sale in the dozens, so they can get huge profits. I almost want to throw a banana, like long hair. How can you say it is due to mainlanders? What is it that you call it now? The SSD. People are not deterred. I have seen from newspapers that they actually bring in loads and loads of cash. They don't count the banknotes. They say put it on a scale, and then you know how much it weighs. They say if it is expensive, I'll buy one flat. If it is not expensive, I'll buy two flats, because they have all the cash in their hands. So they don't mind about affordability. The figures prove that all our measures have been wrong. All our policies have been misguided. And prices have risen by 100% in a matter of 4 years. How can you explain yourselves? This is not a local market anymore. The market has become a different market. Yesterday, C.Y. Leung was saying there would be priority for Hong Kong people. Do you really accord absolute priority to Hong Kong people? if that is the case, you have to come up with a policy for it. And what is your question? I have to state the background first. The market, of course, is made up of supply and demand. I agree that you have to supply more land. But if it is not farmed land, the first flat would be built when C.Y. Leung has completed his 5-year term. So supply will come in the next 5 years. And actually in the next year or two, I can already speculate on property and I will get 100% gain. So you also have to suppress demand, and you can only do two things. One, market speculation, and two, what is essential. You have to make sure that the essential need of Hong Kong people should be satisfied, and you have to first tackle that. Or else, if you still allow speculation in the market, then whatever you say will not be meaningful. So 2 questions. Number 1. You say your core priority for Hong Kong people, what is your indicator? There are 3 possibilities. 1, keeping the status quo. 2, prices should continue to dip. And 3, that prices should dip to a level where Hong Kong people can afford it. Do you have these 3 indicators? The second way, you say there is the new SSD. I will tell you the effect will be eroded in a month. Have you thought about capital gains tax? Because all the capital gain will be taxed and it has to increase geometrically so you can suppress speculation. And also the keeping of 2 to 3 units without owner occupation or renting out, will there be more tax? And number 4, only selling to Hong Kong residents. In other words, before we have new housing, you have to stipulate that all flats should be sold only to Hong Kong residents. This is what is done in Australia. Do not think that this is an economic issue. It is a political issue. If people do not have good accommodation or suitable housing, whatever you say, whatever you do, they will rise up against you. Only 40 seconds. Let me talk about absolute priority for Hong Kong people. The Hong Kong property for Hong Kong residents is such that there will be this lease in the land grant that we can say the property should only be sold to Hong Kong people. But then we have to balance different things. What about flats that have already been completed? And we cannot just come in and say, even with regard to land that has not been subject to such a condition in the land grant, that they have to be sold to Hong Kong people only. No, I'm talking about the future. Are you going to learn from the Australian example? Well, we have already done that with 2 sites in Kai Tak. If you want officials to answer all your questions, please leave them enough time to do so.
I'll be asking in the second round, all right, if there is time. Mr. James Toh. Well, a few years ago, I was the chairman on the SSD legislation. That's why many issues have also been considered. All right, the administration is saying this. For non-local residents, including companies, they'll be subject to the BSD. But then looking at para 14 on the exemption, then if a local permanent resident is buying a property together with a close relative who is not a Hong Kong PR, then he will not be subject to this BSD. Indeed, that's something that we have also considered in scrutinizing the bill on SSD. But if we have a company comprising only Hong Kong permanent resident shareholders, and of course they might not be close relatives, so there might be several people forming this company and they'd like to buy this property for the directors to live in, then what's the loophole? All right, you will have to compare this with another situation. All right, for a local permanent resident with a close relative, and if he's buying the property as a natural person, then of course he will not be subject to this tax. But then if he forms his company, then he'll have to pay this BSD. So would it not be unfair? All right, you say that for the HKPR, he's a shareholder, but then subsequently he transferred the shares to a non-local resident. So you're suggesting that he might be doing this for avoiding tax. But then what about companies solely owned by Hong Kong permanent residents, and if they are transferring the shares to non-local residents, then what kind of loophole will this create? Can you give us an example as to what kind of a loophole that is? Yes, Ms. Mabel Chen. First of all, I'd like to set Mr. To's question concerning non-Hong Kong permanent residents, and if they are close relatives and when they buy property, then they will have to, if they want to apply for exemption, they will have to meet certain conditions. In fact, we also had a discussion when we introduced the SST with regard to companies. Just now, we said that, for companies held by Hong Kong permanent residents, precisely because the directors or the holders of these companies, their shareholding could also be transferred to other parties, and as a result, they could also transfer the shares to non-permanent residents of Hong Kong. In other words, for a company held by Hong Kong permanent residents, if they just transfer the shares or if they issue new shares, and if the shares can be sold, and such shares could also include the holding of such property, then that could create a very huge loophole, so that for non-local permanent residents, they'll be able to buy up such shares, and then they will be able to hold such properties in such forms. And recently, indeed, there were press reports saying that that could also become a tax avoidance initiative, and therefore we will have to plug this loophole. But then on the other hand, we also understand that Hong Kong permanent residents, if they have to hold a company in order to buy property, they might have this need. But then we also have to point out that they can also put in place alternative arrangements, for example, through their personal identity. We do not rule the possibility that they might have a need in buying up properties, and they can also make use of such arrangements. And therefore, we have balanced the needs, and we have also assessed all the factors. And then we decided that we cannot exclude companies held by Hong Kong permanent residents. But then if they are operating in a form of a company, but then if they buy the property in their own personal capacity, then that would not be good. Are you saying that they will have to sign a trust document to the company? That would also mean that they will also have to pay the BSD, right? So what you said would not be able to resolve their problems. So what I think is, if this is indeed what you have in mind, then some people might think that, all right, on the issue of new shares, that might be a problem. But then in the Inland Revenue Ordinance, is it possible for you to introduce anti-tax avoidance measures so that for Hong Kong permanent residents' shares, if they have come down to a particular percentage, let's say if it's below 90% being held by Hong Kong permanent residents, then within a particular period of time, let's say within 5 years, then they will have to repay the BSD that will come into effect immediately, so that you would not be unreasonably discriminating against them. Well, can you be brief in your reply? Well, as Mr. To said, there are different scenarios and different ways to go about it. And if we have to introduce an anti-tax avoidance measure in the IRO as a result of that, it will not just affect property transaction, but that it will also affect the whole regime on the transfer of shares of companies. And that would be very difficult to have a watertight legislation covering all scenarios. But then the whole purpose of the measures would be to cover property transaction. Once you are going to do away with the special stamp duties, you can do away with the whole package. I'm not suggesting that for the other transactions you will have to introduce a system. You're just targeting buyers. So can it apply only to buyers? Time's up. Next, Mr. Dennis Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. What I'd like to ask is, well, under Article 56 of the Basic Law, the Chief Executive, in putting forth important pieces of legislation and policy suggestions, he will have to consult the Executive Council. And I understand that on the 26th of October, the Executive Council formally recommended that the two initiatives be introduced. So I'd like to know, normally speaking, how much notice will be given to EXCO members, and when will they be given the papers in advance before any discussion takes place in the EXCO? Because, well, some EXCO members are saying that, before the 26th of October, they had no idea as to what was to be introduced. But then according to the normal practice of EXCO procedures for holding meetings and so on, well, how long in advance would they be given the papers, and usually how much time would they be given to consider or to look into an important policy, so that by the 26th of October they will be able to make or give their advice to the administration, I'm sure they would not be just informed on the 26th of October, because given the fact that this is an important policy and there are many details involved, so the notification period would be important. So when were they notified? And also Mr. James Toh also raised a number of issues about transfer of access and so on. I hope that the administration will consult the Law Society and the relevant parties on those issues, because they are responsible to provide advice to their clients in transferring such assets or properties, and I'm sure, and I hope that you consult them, because I'm sure there are many details and legal issues that will have to be addressed. Thank you. Yes, Professor Chen? Yes, I'll answer the question. Concerning the involvement of EXCO members in EXCO discussions, I think the Chief Executive and also before yesterday, the FS, Mr. John Zhang already gave you the details, and there is nothing that I'd like to supplement. But then what I'd like to say is that, well, when it comes to sensitive issues like taxation matters or arrangements, the government's practice is that we do go by a very strict confidentiality rule. Only those public officers who are directly involved will know about this. This is strictly on a need-to-know basis. And secondly, about the transfer of assets, I've noted your views. Thank you. Yes, Professor Chung. Just now, Mr. Kwok asked about the issue of papers in advance of EXCO meetings, but then if it involves sensitive matters, then the normal practice is that the papers would only be made available at the time of the meeting. And on this occasion, indeed, like we have explained in the past, the Chief Executive tried to find out if any members had any conflict of interest before he released the papers to them. All right, so other than the officials in charge, all the EXCO members were only informed of the details and the policy on the day of the meeting, including official members of EXCO. They were only made aware on that day. Next, Dr. Fernando Cheung. Thank you, Chairman. Well, these are measures to tackle the speculation in the market or speculative activities in the market. The market is not just exuberant, it's actually frenzy. There is a frenzy in the market because property prices have already gone beyond the affordability of the community. It's not just that the property prices are very high. Rentals have also skyrocketed, and according to Realty estate agent, well, during the first 9 months, the prices have already gone up to a new high. It's a record high. All right, given the high rentals, there are many grassroots who are not able to go into public rental housing, and they are still insisting that there will only be 15,000 new units being produced every year. And then for those in the middle class, they are not eligible for public rental housing, but then rentals have been going up or soaring. And now we have also done away with rent control under the Landlord and Tenancy Ordinance. So would you consider relaunching rent controls so that for the grassroots and also the middle class, well, given the high residential property prices and also with the soaring of rentals, how are you able to ensure that they are not going to suffer? And also, can you consider alternative measures to provide some relief to these middle class people, in particular in terms of the tax spending or rentals or rent spending? Would there be tax rebates or concessions to them? Also, I'd like to follow up on a point made by Mr. K.K. Fong just now. All right, there are properties, whether they're commercial or residential properties, they're actually left vacant. And according to the reports by the HKMA, actually we have more residential flats than the actual number of households living in those flats. So would the administration be introducing this hoarding tax on residential property? In other words, if they hoard up the property for a long while without letting it, whether it's residential or commercial, actually this would also drive prices up. So will you consider introducing such a tax? Can he answer the question? Well, with regard to new tax types, I'll defer to Professor Chan later. All right, on the supply of public rental housing and so on. Well, for the increase in rentals, well, this is also a concern for the government. That's why it's one of the reasons why we have to introduce this demand control measure. With regard to supply, yes, we agree that we have to increase supply. And under the LTHS, what we are trying to do is that for different groups and needs, we try to conduct a comprehensive analysis and assessment on their needs, and of course that would also affect the government's housing planning and land planning and so on. With regard to the relaunching of rent control, is a more complex issue, and several years ago when we lifted rent controls, there were also very extensive debates within this council, and the government does not have any plan at present to relaunch the rent control scheme. But then I understand that next week we're going to have a motion debate on housing supply, and I'm sure there will be more opportunities for us to explain that to members. Professor Chan, very briefly on how the administration is going to provide relief to the public, whether there can be tax concessions and so on. Our long-standing practice, which has been effective, that is, we will consider introducing more allowance, because it's difficult to say who is using how much on a particular activity, whether he's using it for renting a property or whatever. That would be difficult to tell, and therefore we usually try to introduce personal allowance to help them. That would be more reasonable and easy to do. With regard to tax types, of course, there might be policy needs, and also the practicality of such a measure would also have to be borne in mind, or else there might be disputes, and whether it's the issue of fairness would also have to be considered. So we will have to consider if it's fair and if it's feasible to introduce a particular measure. Dr. Zhang, Chairman, concerning what Professor Chang said, yes, in the long run, of course, we will have to rely on the LTHS, but then we are talking about a near fire. How are you going to address that problem? And also on Professor Chan's point just now, the CE came to this council yesterday. He said that he would not be prepared to consider this capital gains tax. But then, what about later? Well, he said that at this particular point in time, he would not consider this. But then he did not rule anything. In the second round, we have Evan Leung, Michael Tian. So that's in the first round. Anybody who would like to ask in the second round, or else we will have to draw a line there, because we will have to wrap up our meeting by 12:45, and therefore Mr. KK Fong, we simply do not have time to give you in the second round. I've not asked any question at all myself. All right, Ellen Lau.
From what the two bureau directors said, we heard that when it is about taxation, it would be a sensitive issue, and for the sake of confidentiality, we have heard that the arrangement is such that EXCO members, before they went into a room for a meeting on the 26th of October, they did not know anything about the topic for discussion. With regard to this SSD, well, just now we have asked questions on it for 2 hours, and there are so many questions about it that it would affect livelihood, it would affect overseas investors' sentiments, and whether overseas companies can buy property for their staff in Hong Kong, etc. We believe it should not just be what CE had in mind, and then all of a sudden you called an EXCO meeting, and then people only got to know about it when they opened the document envelopes. So this is an important policy. You should not have dealt with it in such a manner. And if that is not the case, which bureau chief had discussed with the CE before such a policy was launched? Mr. Zhang, as Mr. Chen said a moment ago, this time around, only directly related officials were involved. Me, myself, and Mr. Chen, and also Development Bureau Chief, and also FS, and of course the CE. And also in the relevant bureaus, 1 or 2 civil servants, for example, the PS, who are directly responsible for the policy. Of course, unavoidably, they were part of the discussion. But it was kept so secret that anyone who did not have the need to know did not know it. So whether it be official or unofficial members of EXCO, if they are not related, now of course unofficials were not related to the issue, therefore they did not get wind of it beforehand. What about the brewing period? When did it start? No, sorry, we cannot disclose the details because there are many government policies which have been under discussion for a long time. As I was saying, the administration will be watching the market and the economic situation, and there is a mechanism to do this, but I cannot disclose it. Sorry, I don't get it. I'm just asking you, this time around, this is an SSD which is going to create a huge impact. When did it start to be put on the drawing board? I did not ask you how and what data had been used. I think you have to answer the question. The question is just about when. No, we cannot answer the question because many policies have been considered for a very long time. Well, okay, we have all heard the answer, Chairman. Why is it that they think they need not answer it, and also the attitude that this official was embracing? I don't think this is necessary because we're having a rational discussion. In this paper today, one of the proposals is to introduce a mechanism for the LegCo to make use of a negative vetting system in order to consider future revisions and adjustments. Who can answer the question, why should it be negative vetting? When members asked questions just now, they were also aware and were asking whether, facing changes in the market, whether the administration could tackle that in a more speedy manner. And therefore I said that in our suggestion, we are going to discuss with members that we could go for a negative vetting procedure so that the administration could tackle sudden changes in the economy so that we could react speedily. We think that is appropriate. How is that going to be different from the present? Any difference from the present practice? Well, please ask the officials through the chairman. Yes, I'm asking the officials through you, Chairman. How is this going to be different from the original legislation? Who can take the question? What is the difference from the present situation? Ms. Mabel Chan. Let me try to answer the question. The direction we'd like to take is that we would like to be able to respond in a more flexible manner, that we can make use of an adjustment mechanism more speedily within the stamp duty ordinance with regard to the type of the tax and also the tax rate that is stipulated in the principal ordinance. Sorry, we only have 15 seconds more. Can I understand you this way? Starting from 2 years ago when there was this change, the administration has been watching the impact of the SSD to see whether it can do anything about property prices. And then suddenly, on the 26th of October, you announced something for that to come into effect at midnight. Why do you want to replace the present mechanism? Well, since officials were saying something and there was an overlap of voices and the officials were not clearly heard, even if the time is exceeded, I would allow Ms. Mabel Chan to give a brief reply. Actually, the entire legislation must come through LegCo. That is something that cannot be argued. But as to the details and the tax rate, actually apart from the primary legislation, we are actively thinking whether that can be done by subsidiary legislation. And when we submit the legislation to LegCo later on, we will be consulting members on this one. Members, just now, Mr. Jeffrey Lam came in and he raised his hand for the first round. I said I would have to draw the line, but since this is a major issue, I would ask members to agree with me that as the joint chairman, I can exercise my statutory power to extend the meeting by 15 minutes. Any objection? If not, I will allow Mr. Jeffrey Lam to stand in the queue, and in the second round, Mr. K.K. Feng will have 3 minutes. Now, Mr. Michael Teen. This is a paper on the overheated property market. In the property market, we don't only have sales, but also rentals. My question is on the rental market, which is also overheated. Why do I say this? Because you can wait to buy property. You don't have to do it today. If there is a sudden drop in property prices, heaven forbid, people might fear even more than prices going up. But then when you rent property, you have to rent it. You don't want to sleep on the street. Just now, members also asked this question. We now have this very strange phenomenon. In Hong Kong, there are many new buildings, new flats, which are left vacant. The landowner would want prices to go up first before renting them out. They think that if they rent it on the cheap, it might affect the yield. And the tenants may have to pay over 30-40% of their income for rent. And what is happening in Hong Kong? People are just working to pay landowners, and they have to give out a bigger portion of their income for rental, so they eat less and they buy less clothing. My business has fallen recently. I have been asking customers, and they say this because I pay more in rental, so I don't have money for clothing. And so it affects the entire economy. And I have heard that there are tens of thousands of vacant flats in the market. It is unimaginable. Property, housing, is a scarce resource in Hong Kong, even if we have a free market. So I'd like to ask you whether you have measures to tackle an overheated rental market. Do you have short-term policies? If not, when are you going to launch such policies? Who can take the question? Mr. Zhang. Chairman, the administration has been watching the market, including the sale and rental markets. We understand that rentals have been spiraling, and they have exceeded the peak in 1997. But looking at the vacancy rate in the private market, it is about 4%. If necessary, the government economist can supplement. We certainly know that whether it be property prices or rentals, if they skyrocket, there will be an impact on residents as well as business. We do not rule out doing something about the rental market if necessary. We have an open mind. We do not rule out any possibilities if there is a need. Mr. Tin, you don't have a timetable? All right. Then can I ask you about the 4% you mentioned? How many flats does that translate into? Can I ask the government economist to give the information? If we look at private flats, there are a total of 1.2 million private flats. And at the end of last year, the vacancy rate was 4.3%, which is more or less the same vacancy rate of 1997. And we are talking about like 50,000 such units. In other words, there are 50,000 vacant units, meaning that they should be made available for tenants, but they are not. I think it is a huge problem. Has it remained at 4%? Has it ever dropped to 1 or 2%? What is the history like? 4.3% is almost a historical low. It reflects that the supply and demand situation is quite tight. When we had the worst economy in 2003, the vacancy rate was like 6 to 7%. In other words, we can understand that sales in the property market mean that there will be a transaction period, and there would be this period of natural vacancy. The overall vacancy rate of 4.3% is way below the long-term average. Now, can I ask the Bureau Chief this question? You said you would be looking for measures, but would you also have measures to tackle these so-called vacant flats? Well, as Mr. Chan said a moment ago, the administration will not divulge any of our thinking before we launch policies. Right? We understand, okay. Next member, Mr. Lo Wai-kwok. Of course, we can do something about the property market by controlling prices, so we can dampen speculation. I think this is the focus of the meeting today. Another thing we can do is to supply more public housing. In other words, even the sale of public housing. But I have a more pragmatic issue to ask you. To have a bigger public housing stock, well, if you look at the civil service resources, I mean civil servants who are professionals, I think you should have more professionals in the civil service. You have stopped the building of HOS, but now you are reviving it. And then by way of PRH, you are looking at producing 15,000 units every year. You might want to heighten it to over 18,000. But of course, the public would like to see a bigger figure. And you can imagine that the civil service team, meaning the professionals like engineers, they are now under a heavy workload. I understand that the departments are asking for more engineers. I'd like to take the opportunity today to get an understanding into your proposed arrangement. You have to make sure that you have all the resources you need so you can satisfy the provision of public housing. Mr. Jiang, I will defer to Mr. Prescott to give you the details. But indeed, the administration is working at full steam to provide housing, including public housing for sale. We do understand that there is a bigger demand on staff at the departments. And some departmental consultative committees have told me the same thing. I put a lot of store by that. And in this round of resource allocation, we have increased the establishment. Mr. Prescott, please.
I'm glad this point's been raised because I want to assure the members that we are seeking additional resources in all grades, in all seniorities, from directorate right down to our new recruits, particularly for the professional grades, engineers, architects, and so on. We were given approval in a special mid-year exercise through the resource allocation exercise for a number of posts earlier this year. And we've also sought additional posts through the regular resource allocation exercise. In fact, we approached this council for approval for 5 directorate posts back in June, and that thankfully was approved. We will be coming back in future to seek additional posts at the directorate level. In the meantime, we are recruiting. We are arranging promotion boards, and in fact I have had over 50 promotion boards held within the department in the last 2 months to ensure that we have people in the right place. We're also looking at our methodology. We've reorganized some of our units to make sure that we have the right people in the right place because, of course, with additional pressure from the new home ownership scheme program, as well as the fact that some of our existing development sites are getting rather complicated, we need to make sure we have the relevant team. So we're not just looking at civil service, we're also looking at making sure we optimize the use of contracting out, the use of short-term contract staff to make sure that we have the right balance within the department. And we'll continue to keep an eye on this. Thank you.
Mr. Low, any further follow-up? No. All right, last one to speak, Mr. Jeffrey Lam. Thank you, Chairman. Well, this is a very drastic measure announced shortly, and I only learned about this less than an hour before attending the meeting. I understand that this is a very special situation warranting special action, but I understand that it's going to help curb short-term speculation on residential property. But then in the longer term, I believe that increasing land supply will be the ultimate solution. Still, there is a short supply situation, and as the administration has repeatedly said, it would try its best to release more land for development. But then what is most critical is that there is a short supply situation in the market. So when will the administration be able to tell us when it can come up with long-term measures to address this supply situation. Well, on this occasion, we have speculative activities, and what you've managed to do is to curb speculation on residential property. But what about PRH and also HOS? We have not seen any solution to increase supply in those areas. So can the Secretary tell us, other than these measures, in terms of PRH and HOS, can you tell us what you're going to do or what you would like to do in order to increase supply? Professor Zhang, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Lam for his comments. Indeed, the administration fully agrees that we will have to resolve this problem of short supply, and the fundamental solution is to increase supply. But of course, supply would very much depend on how we can make the best use of our land resources. That's why, after assuming office, the new government has been making every effort to deal with this problem. But of course, that would also include developing new land, and also how we can make the best use of some existing sites. And it also involves the density of development without affecting the overall policy or sustainability and conservation of the sites. Will we be able to increase the density? We've been taking a very comprehensive look into this, and today the Secretary for Development is not here, or else I'm sure he will be able to give you more details. But then, other than the fact that we are lagging behind in terms of housing supply, as both myself and Professor Chen explained at the beginning, well, with regard to market changes and also with the high liquidity and also the excessively low interest rate environment, that those have attributed to the exuberance in the market. At least that would affect the short-term demand, and therefore in terms of long-term supply, we will have to do something about it. But then in terms of demand management, we also have to take measures to address the issue. That's why we have launched the two measures. Well, Chairman, as the Secretary just said, they will be looking at some existing sites, and they will try their best to release new sites. And they would also look at some existing sites to see how they can make the best use of those sites. And I understand that there are people out there talking about lifting the height restriction and relaxing the plot ratio and so on. So within such framework, are you prepared to think out of the box? Or are you going to adopt the past lines so that you would only be able to work along the established policies? Professor Chiang, on making the best use of land, well, of course, height is one thing, and also for plot ratio, that's another thing, and also in terms of the use, that can also be considered, or zoning of the land, and that would also include overall town planning issues, because land supply is not just to meet residential needs. Well, for non-residential, commercial, and community facilities and so on, we will have to take a comprehensive look at all those needs. But then we believe that housing need is one of the top priorities in our community, because there is an acute need for housing, and therefore, whether it's within the administration or elsewhere, we believe that we will have to work together to address the problem. But then it will take 3 or 4 years before you can put up new flats. But then in a short term, what measures can be rolled out in order to help people buy their flats and also suppress property prices and also reduce volatility in the market? Well, we don't have time to answer the question. Well, many members have asked questions, and as a member of the panel, I will be asking questions, and then Mr. KK Fong, you'll be given some time. Well, what I'd like to ask is, with the enhanced measures on SSD, in the first-hand property market, how many flats have been affected as a result of the two new measures? Or in the completed flats, well, as far as completed flats are concerned, so in the first-hand property market, how many flats are made available since the introduction of the two measures? And also, have you done any assessment Well, as a result of the enhanced measures, some developers originally intended to offer some flats for sale, and now they have withheld it. So have you got the number? So have you got such numbers? So 2 questions. Chairman, I don't have those figures with me right away, but then very often it depends. Well, on the timing of offering flats for sale by the developers, of course, it's difficult for us to make any forecast. But then since the rolling out or announcement of the new measures or coming into effect of the new measures, well, for flats that are offered any time afterwards, they'll be subject to the new SSD and the BSD. And of course, if that's done before the 27th of October, that would be subject to the then SSD, that is under the original SSD package. And if it's before 2010, then of course it would not be subject to the SSD. And therefore there are different types of flats that are put up for sale. But then for first-hand residential property that are offered recently, whether it is rolled out or launched before October the 27th, they will be affected. All right, can you provide the information to us afterwards? Yes, we'll try. We'll try to provide you with the supplementary information. Thank you, Bureau Director. I'd like to explain why I would like to get such information, because later on, when we scrutinize the relevant bill, that would be very meaningful. Because with the enhanced measures on SSD, yes, indeed, that would suppress the demand. But then on the other hand, if the demand or the supply is such that if the major developers are withholding the sale of such flats, then it would render the enhanced SSD ineffective, because they'll be watching what you're going to do with the SSD before they offer the flats for sale. And therefore, I think the administration would also have to conduct some surveys, and you will have to know the actual situation, because some developers might already be planning to put up 400 flats for sale, but then as soon as you introduce the enhanced SSD, they withhold it. So they will just put up 40 flats for sale to test the water, and then if they are not selling well, then they will withhold the whole batch. And then in the future, before you roll out any measures, they'll be able to see what they need to do. So you said that you would be collecting the information. I hope that that can be disclosed to this council later. Yes, of course, Chairman. It's not possible for us to forecast what the developers are going to do with regard to their marketing strategy. But then with the announcement on the enhanced SSD on the 26th of October, we never said that the additional SSD will cease to be effective from a certain date. And if they want to wait till this is lifted, then they will have to wait for a long time. All right, I believe that the statistics will be helpful. Because if the developers, if they just hold up those flats, and if they just adopt a wait-and-see attitude, then that would dampen the effectiveness of these additional measures rolled out by the administration. Yes, point taken. All right, I'll finish with my questions. All right, Mr. KK Fong, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to give more time to the officials. All right, I've already shared my views with you, and I have 2 types of questions. Number 1, with the additional SSD, the purpose is to suppress property prices so that the prices would not double in 4 years. But then there are 3 indicators. Number 1, you have to maintain status quo so that there will be no further new highs. And number 2, you would like it to come down, and you would like to see the prices coming down steadily or slowly. And also, you also hope that these properties would be more affordable to Hong Kong people. But then fourthly, have you considered other alternatives? For example, capital gains tax. Definitely, that would be very effective in curbing property speculation. And also, have you got any idea of introducing a hoarding up tax? Because in if I understand it correctly, actually, if you try to hoard up properties or things elsewhere, it's against the law. But then in Australia, all right, we have introduced this Hong Kong property for Hong Kong people. But then, within the next 5 years, if they, before you are able to increase housing supply, all the flats would only be sold to Hong Kong people. So Hong Kong people will have absolute priority in buying residential properties in Hong Kong. Can that be done? Professor Zhang, on the proposed capital gains tax and also the holding up tax, I think Professor Chen has already responded to that. In considering introducing different tax types, different factors will have to be taken into account. With regard to property prices, are there any indicators? Indeed, we would not say that a particular price would be right. Well, what we are concerned about before we roll out those new measures, as we said, we already saw that there was this exuberance in the market, and also because as the property market has been driven by such sentiments, and that would be rather risky, and that would also affect our financial system and also our economy. That's why after considering this basket of measures, we decided to roll out those measures. With regard to whether we should restrict non-locals in buying residential properties in Hong Kong. In other words, you do not have any indicator. Well, so long as the market can cool down a little bit, it's okay. But then in 4 years, prices have doubled. So you will have to allow Professor Chen to respond. I think members are like the reporters. They are all asking what price is reasonable. Well, the only thing that I can say is that we'll be considering the basket of measures. Well, a stable housing environment or property environment is our target, and we'll have to consider different factors. It's difficult for us to say that we will have to quantify everything. We will have to look at different indicators. Well, in paragraph 5 of your paper, you said that you will be looking at the affordability rate at 31.7% instead of 50%. Is it possible? Or else, if you do not set a figure, or you do not have any indicator, then you'll be fluctuating. But we will not be telling you as to what the level should be. As I just told you, I do not understand what Professor Chen was saying. Even if you do not understand it, that's all he's prepared to say for the time being. Anything from the administration further? All right, I'd also like to say a bit more about restricting non-locals in buying residential flats. Well, Hong Kong is a city where the rule of law prevails, and we will have to respect the spirit of the law. And if there is no restriction whatsoever in the past, then for developers offering any flat for sale, they can sell the flats to anybody they like. We cannot just say that, all right, these flats cannot be sold to non-Hong Kong permanent residents. But then with the new measures and the new lease terms, of course, we can say that. That's why under the Hong Kong Property for Hong Kong People, in the land lease will be imposing this condition, so that the flats to be offered by the developers, they can only be sold to Hong Kong permanent residents, and also within a 30-year period, they can only be resold to Hong Kong permanent residents. But then I'm referring to individual sites. Well, even if we have not reached your standard, I don't know what's meant by having cooled down the market, whether it's the affordability rate should be 31 or what percentage. Or you're saying that the current market is exuberant. But then before the market cools down, can you say that those flats can only be offered to Hong Kong permanent residents, or for new leases? All right, we've announced that for the 2 sites in Hong Kong is a pilot, in Kai Tak is a pilot program, and as we have announced, the administration does not rule anything.
以港人港地批出嚟嘅。
我諗都差唔多啦，馮月。今日咧，我哋個會議開到呢度，咁啊冇其他事項，多謝咧係部門咧係出席啊，多謝晒。
多謝主席。